step, the easiest way that I can think of to do this was in our Slack channel. We've, I put this post in here. That's our GitHub. So if you haven't been to it yet, it's open to anybody. So all you really have to do is click on this. You may have to set up like a GitHub account if you're not currently a GitHub user. But then once that's all done, this is an open repository. So anybody can get access to it. You certainly, if you're familiar with GitHub, you can clone it to your own repository. You can do all of the great stuff that GitHub does. I'll be honest with you, I'm a GitHub novice. I've been having a lot of fun with it over the last couple of days. But, sorry, distracted there for a minute. I'm just going to go through the simplest way, and you can take it from there, whatever you want to do. So the first thing we need to do once you get to the repository here is a couple of things to notice, just kind of the setup of what we've got here. So there's the Captivate file. We'll be looking at that in a minute when we actually publish it, but I put a version of that in there. Sorry, another call coming in, busy morning. So you've got the Captivate file. That just holds the Captivate itself. So if you want to take a look at that or use it as a template, that's in there. There's the SuperWrapper source files. So these are the files that you're going to need to add to a Captivate package. And then I put a couple of examples in here. So this is a fully working non-SCORM version that already has SuperWrapper installed. And then this is a SCORM version. So there's just a slight difference in how we have to load the packages for SCORM. So there's some slight differences in how we edit it. And then down here is the README, which is just this document here. I've also put in an FAQ and just some other stuff. That lots of work to do on those yet, and a great place for you all if you have questions. I'll be adding to this and trying to make this as robust as possible. So here's kind of the step-by-step instructions of what we need to do in order to install this so that you're able to start tracking all of the xAPI stuff, right? So I think I'm just going to read it kind of step by step. And again, I did this best I could, kind of thinking, okay, outsider looking in. So if anything looks really confusing or as I'm explaining it, there'd be a better way to explain it, by all means, stop me and say, hey, Brian, think about this. You can use the Captivate file that's in this repo, and the credentials and the init statement are already in there as a template, as you like. And so I've found a typo. The only ask that I have is if you're going to use this one as the template, to please change the project name, because we're all going to share the same LRS. We don't have to, but for anybody that doesn't have access to an LRS, Watershed has been gracious enough to give us a license for this cohort, and we can kind of all use that. But the activity name should be unique because that's actually what's in the xAPI statement. More about that in a minute. So let's take a look at that Captivate publish here. So if any of you took a look, this is the same one that I have in the Slack channel posted as a working example project. The only thing is I don't think my working example included video yet, and this one has a video in it. So we're actually I'm going to publish this package, but I'm going to kind of show you some of the stuff that's going on and what we need to do for setup. So the first thing that we need to do is, let me go back to the GitHub instructions. So we're just kind of step by step here. So in your Captivate, on the first slide, on slide enter, you need to execute JavaScript, and then in the script window, we need to add this init. So showing you where that is in the Captivate. If we go to the slide, we go to actions, you can see right here, execute JavaScript. And so I've already set that in this, and if I open this up, you can see there it is, my init call function, and that's what sets Captivate Wrapper to work. That's really about the only thing you have to do code-wise, and everything else the wrapper does for you. Okay, so once that's done, the next step that we have to do is in the Captivate variables, you have to set up your LRS. That's how it's going to communicate with the LRS. So there's two different sets, and this kind of there's two different parts here. So your endpoint will always be the same, but at least in Watershed, I know we have both a production environment and a sandbox environment, and you may want to toggle back and forth between those depending what you're doing. So I created two sets of credentials within Captivate within those variables, so you can set up either. For sure, you need to set up whichever one you're pointing to, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So going back to Captivate, you just that's just a matter of going up here, project variables. So if we look at those different things, so let's look at our endpoint. So you look here, you can see here's the Watershed endpoint. That, you know, and your LRS should provide you this. So if you want to change the LRS, by all means, you can do that. Don't feel like you have to use the Watershed one. If you've got your own you want to test it on, this is where you are going to change that endpoint, is right here. Just put in your custom endpoint. And then the same thing with your key and your secret. So and you want to make sure that you're using the production endpoint, production key, and production secret for right now. So, oh, and I just found something. I don't have the sandbox credentials even set up in this one because I don't have a sandbox environment for this. So, so let's just, again, focus on these three credentials, right, which is just your LRS information. Again, if you want to use the wrapper or you want to use the credentials from our Watershed account, you're more than welcome to do that. Okay, so then that's really all the setup that we need to do. So the next thing that we've got to do is now publish this Captivate. So we've got a package to add the wrapper to. So I'm just going to go, to publish here. And just a couple of things that you should kind of be cognizant of when you're publishing the package. First of all, you probably don't want to zip it because you're just going to want to unzip it, or you're going to need to unzip it because we've got to manipulate the actual folder itself. So I think by default, Captivate checks this zip files box. So probably just want to uncheck that. The only format this is compatible with is HTML5. So I just turn off SWF if you're still using Flash. I have no idea what this wrapper would do with the Flash package. I've never used it and I've never tested it that way. So you're welcome to try, but I'm pretty sure it'll fail horribly. The other thing that you need to do, or the only other consideration, is e-learning output. Do you want it to be a SCORM course? So are you going to be publishing it to an LMS? If so, just set your appropriate SCORM settings in there. Or the other option is to disable it like I've got here. I'm just going to publish it to a server. So there is no SCORM on a server. So it works with either. It'll work on an LMS with SCORM or not. We just have to, it's how we deal with the package afterwards that we have to make some adjustments. So I'm going to publish this to the folder that's on my server, but I'm going to rename it because this is our demo. So I'll do conference call demo. We'll just call it public. We'll call it that, and we'll publish the package. This is going to take a few moments to publish. So any questions so far? Thoughts, comments?
Pretty straightforward so far. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, tried to make it as easy as I could so that, you know, if you're not super familiar with all this jargon, that you can navigate your way through it and have a usable product.
So you use the underscore, V underscore, and then your variable name. Is the V for variable?
Just for variable, yeah, that's kind of, it's a naming convention a lot of people seem to use for Captivate, so I just adopted it, but you could make it, and that's what the wrapper is looking for, is that variable name, so that's why it has to be that specific name.
Okay, cool. Did you make any changes to the wrapper, you know, in the last month or so when we looked at it together? Is this, it seems, I was just wondering if it's been updated.
Yeah, it's quite a bit more robust than it was back then. It's a lot of the context is more filled out in the statements that it's producing. I don't think it was doing video. I think I tried to demo video to you that day and it wasn't working. That's all been updated. So yeah, there's been quite a few updates. And I continue to work on it anytime I've got, you know, a few hours of spare time. So that's one thing and I'll keep real close on the Slack channel as to updates and on the GitHub repository, but this is something you probably want to pull the package for pretty regularly, because I'll continue to update it and as we find bugs and uncover stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I like the ease in editing the LRS information. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I tried to make it so that you were able to do that. Okay, so let's go take a look now at where that published. Okay, so here we've got it. So this is what this was is I already pulled the repo. So just like I talked about with GitHub, I just hit clone. I downloaded the zip file and I put it in here. Or let's just say I did. This is the same thing would happen. The only difference now is I've got this conference call demo, and I'll push that up to the repo before we're done, so you can look at it for example. But let's look at a Captivate publish package and what we get out of it. So this is just straight out of the box. We haven't done anything to it yet. Here's what is inside of a Captivate package. Okay, so you've got these few different folders that have all of your different JavaScript and your images and all of the things, your videos, all the stuff that makes Captivate work sits inside of these folders. And then you've got this index.html. So the one thing that we have to manipulate now is that. So let's just go back to the repo, just kind of follow along with the instructions again, right? So we published the package, we did HTML only, we unzipped it. We did non-SCORM. Okay, so now we're on to step 4. So the first thing we need to do is in the repo, you've got the SuperWrapper source file folder. So let's go find that folder and let's get the next steps right away. So we're going to find that folder and we're going to find these 3 files: controller no IE, and tincan.js. Okay, so once we do that, so I'm going to go, just go back to here. So now I am in SuperWrapper source files. Okay, so this is the one that we just published, right? Just to keep everybody on the same page. This is the one we just published. Here's the source files. So now you'll see, okay, I've got a few different things here. I've got the controller. I'm going to grab that. I'm also going to grab controller no Internet Explorer, because xAPI just doesn't work with IE7. So if a user tries to have IE7, they're just presented with a message saying this course isn't going to work. We can change that if that doesn't work on your LMS. If some users still use IE7, it's just the way that I set it up. And then tincan.js. So I'm just going to take those files. I'm going to make a copy of them. Then I'm going to go back to what we just published, conference call demo, find the assets folder, find the JavaScript folder, and you've got these 3 files by default will always be in there. And now I'm just going to paste in those other 3 files. Okay, so that's done. Then the final thing that I need to do is step 5 and 6, which is going to be to let the index file know to call these new files that we've got in there. So the way that I did this is I created a source file and kind of told you what you needed to do. So again, if we go back to that SuperWrapper source, you're going to find something that's called index source.html, and we need to add lines 15 through 33. So let's look at what that looks like. So I'm going to come, and actually now, hopefully you all have a code editor or some sort of text editor to be able to manipulate these index files. I really like Visual Studio Code if you're looking for a good one. So this is that same folder I've already got open in Visual Studio Code that we were just looking at. So here's our conference call demo folder, okay? And then here's the index page that by default Captivate put out. So this is the code for that index page. All we've got to do now is we need to put in some additional stuff and just change a couple of small things here. So I'm going to go to my SuperWrapper source, and then we've got index source, and now this is, well, there's also a different one for SCORM. There's a slight difference between the two. So this is a non-SCORM course. So I'm going to take this file, and I'm going to open it up. And as we look through here, I'll close my other one when I did that. But as we look through this file now, you'll notice this SuperWrapper stuff in here. When you see SuperWrapper, that's what we're going to need to take, right? So just let's go back here real quick. Lines 15 through 33 must be added. So when I look at this, this is lines 15 through 33. So I'm just going to take this whole snippet here. I'm going to grab it. copy it, and now let me open up our index file. This is the one from, so all I did was, this is our conference call demo file, our published package. Here's that index file, and now we can compare the two. They're open side by side. So you can see I get to this initialized line here, and then I go to function on body load. Well, look at here. Okay, here's initialized. Here's that on body load. Here's the junk that we need to put in between it. So it's just a matter of matching up, you know, those two lines. They'll always be the same in Captivate where those two lines are. So just look for those, and then we're just going to now paste that SuperWrapper code in between it. And then the final thing that we've got to do is in source. Let's scroll through and find, let me go back to the repo because it tells you what to do. Okay, and then we need to find this line in index.html. So we're looking for LJS files equals. Okay, so let me, this is the index again. So this is the one that our published package gave us. We just pasted this in. Let me scroll down now. I know about where to find this LSJ thing that I'm looking for. Or actually, the easiest way to do it would be to go LSJ. Oops, I might not, might have that wrong. LJS files, that's what we're looking for. So,
it's like on 116.
Yeah, LJS files. Okay, yep, there we go. So on 116, so that is what's loading kind of the deployment packages for Captivate, and we need to add our controller and we need to add tin-can to that. So that's what the stuff was up in the beginning. We were defining what those are. So now I'm going to go back to source here, and I'm going to go to here, and we're just going to grab all of this. Now the difference here is the other one we were just adding. In this case, we're replacing. Okay, so what I mean by that is this new line here is calling all of the variables that we called up top so that we could change any of those if we wanted. So we're just replacing this with variable names that is what we assigned up top. But now this would be, it would change that variable before they were ever called back to what it was. We have to make sure we remove that. Or the other thing you can do is right here, anytime you've got the two slashes, it's commented out. So I just comment out what the old version was, and now we've still got it if we want it, but we've got our new version in there. So now we just give this a save. And this is, we're actually publishing live to my server. So it might take me a second to type in this web address right, but if we go to, should I have this preset up? No, and now I got fat fingers on the keyboard. Let's try this again. Slow down, Brian. So Captivate. Okay, that's one of them, but we're not going to go there. I'm just stealing an extension from it. So we called this one call demo, I believe. Hopefully I'm right there. Yep. Okay, so my package is starting now. Let me close this off. Now I didn't pass in, and so now we've got a published package, and this will, it's ready to go. You can, by the fact that this came up rather than the landing page, I know that SuperWrapper is working because it's not SCORM, so there's no place for it to get an email address from. We haven't passed it an email address, so now it's going to prompt the user for an email address because we need to get a user in there so that we can capture xAPI statements. So I'll add it in, and I'll put in Brian at brianfloyd.me, hit enter. And now our package is started. And you'll notice what happened there is all we really did is took the second way that it can find an address, which is passing it in as an mbox parameter or a mail to parameter. So right here, all that first slide did was grabbed my email address and reopened up this website, but had it with the parameter now passed. So we could have skipped that screen by just adding the parameter ourselves if we knew we were sending it to a targeted user or we wanted, you know, that same actor name to come through. We could pass that actor name right here. Okay, so the other thing that you're probably like, okay, this is great, but how do I know that anything's working? I don't know how familiar you guys are with the console in Chrome, but if you hit Command-Option-J, I'm not sure what it is on a PC, it's something like that, but it opens up the console. So this really tells us what's going on. It's the version of SuperWrapper that we're using. Here's the LRS endpoint that we're reporting into. So if you see this, it means that our LRS has successfully been set up and we're communicating with it. And now it's even telling us that 2 statements have been saved. You can drill into those statements just like this, and you can see the entire statement. So now I drop that down. Here's the statement. So now you can see here's the actor is Brian at brianfloyd.me. The verb is access. So we accessed the course here, and so it's passing that we accessed it. And if we look at the target, that is our actual activity. So what is the target? If we look in the definition, we can see that the name is SuperWrapper Captivate Demo. Now, where is it getting this information from? One thing I didn't talk about is if we go back to Captivate and we go to File, Preferences, here, and then you go to Info, right here is where it's pulling it from. So whatever you make this name is what the name that your activity will be for xAPI. Same thing with description. It'll pull this description right into xAPI as well. The other fields you can fill out if you want to, but SuperWrapper doesn't do anything with them. It just uses the project name and the description. So that's kind of how you set what you want to. As far as a base ID goes, how do we create the IDs for our different projects? Because, one of the things with xAPI is really everything kind of needs to be unique. Or doesn't kind of need to be, it really needs to be. So if we look at the ID here, you'll notice what it does is it basically pulls this. So whatever website it's coming from, it's going to pull that part of it as the first part. This is the parent that we're accessing. This is the parent activity that has sub-activities underneath it, and the name, and it's SuperWrapper Captivate Demo, right? And we've just taken out all of the spaces. So it basically takes the name of the course and it concatenates it, which is a fancy word for puts it on the end of this, and that's how all of your IDs are created. So that was the first statement that was saved. The second statement is right here, which is now entered slide, which is different than access the project, because I accessed the project, but did I also open the first slide? So now you're going to get entered slide and all of the appropriate information for that. So let's do a couple of things. Let's take me to the next slide. Okay, and you can see now more statements. So what are now 2 more statements generated? So what are those? If you look there, first of all, we entered the slide, so that's nothing new. But the other thing we did is we also sent another statement that was viewed the slide. And this is saying, you can only view a slide in past tense. So once you've moved to the second slide, you create the verb viewed for the slide you were just at. The reason that's valuable is if you look in results and duration, it took me 3 minutes and 35 seconds that I was on slide 1. So that can be really valuable information to us to know how much time learners are actually spending on each slide, and then we can set up reporting accordingly. So this is all well and fine. If you haven't played with this yet, we'll look in the LRS in a minute. Oh, I know why this is happening. Okay, this is just, there's some error messages here, but the only reason why is I'm using Watershed inside of an iframe that doesn't play, some of the settings Watershed had doesn't play nicely with Captivate, but it still works. So right here, you'll notice I can hit Show LRS, and if you take a look at it, here's the LRS in real time showing us exactly what we've just done. Now, we entered slide 2, we accessed the project, we viewed the slide, we entered the slide, all of that good stuff is being shown right here, right? And then you can, and if you're not seeing up-to-date data in this project, you can hit refresh, and it actually refreshes because it takes a few seconds. Like I just hit this, which toggles hiding LRS, but that wasn't there originally. Now it is, because I told it to watch and listen for when people refresh the page, or for when people toggle the LRS. So it's showing you that we toggled the LRS. So all of that stuff is coming in. So let me slow down for a minute. What questions do you all have before I kind of go on? Is everything making sense? Or did I lose you at statement, or are we still still working well?
I'm good.
Okay. Lynette, any questions? Everything still making sense?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. I do have a couple of questions about, like, do I have to publish this in order to be able to test it? Like, if I publish it on my desktop, can I still send the statements to my LRS, or do I have to publish it on our web server first? Do you know?
So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, for sure, if you published it to your desktop and then you started an Apache server on your desktop, I know it would work.
Okay.
I mean, we can try it. Let's see if it'll work. I think the problem that I always run into is, though, the package doesn't always want to run from my desktop, but let's try it. It's a great question, and I don't know the answer, so let's do this. I'm just going to take it from, I'll take this package and just make a copy of it and throw it on my desktop and see what happens. So we've got conference call demos. This is the one we just did. Let's copy it. Let's see. Let's show it on my desktop. Okay, so in theory, let's see what happens when I try to open index.html. I think it's going to work, actually. We can tell in just a second. SuperWrapper report, like it's loading at least. Let's see if it's sending to the LRS. Okay, this is Safari. So to get to the console, not as nearly as familiar. Give me a sec. I think that's it. Yep, it's still sending straight from my desktop. So great question, and the answer is it looks like you can publish from your desktop, and it still reports in.
Wonderful.
Or test from your desktop. Yeah.
Right.
Now, obviously, that you can't do that with SCORM because there's no SCORM wrapper. I'm sure you're probably aware of that already. I'm trying to think if there's any other caveats. The one thing that I struggle with, but I think it may just be my version of Captivate, is if my project has a play bar. A lot of times in HTML, it fails like from my desktop, and I've never really chased down why that is. So just keep that in mind. If you're having troubles with it loading, it may be that try removing the play bar that Captivate puts in, and you may have better luck.
One of the unique things I'm going to try and do with this is my tutorials live locally on our customers' tablets. So,
oh, neat. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see how I'm sure it's going to send while they're still connected to the internet, but sometimes they have devices that they work offline. So I'm sure I'm going to lose data there, but this will give me more data
definitely.
than I'd had before.
Right. And, I mean, we could create an offline solution too, or that could be something to look at in the future if nothing's available to, have it store the statements locally and then send them all once they're back online again. So could be done.
Yeah, that would be something definitely I would keep in touch with you about for future development.
Right. Okay. So a few more things. It looks like Zoom removed my time limit. I was afraid because there's a 40-minute trial time limit, and I just got a pop-up saying that they removed that. So hopefully we won't run out of time. A couple more things that I can show you is, I don't know if you all have access to our LRS or you're going to use your own LRS. If that's the case, that's fine. But if not, we've got this watershed LRS that's set up, and I'll just kind of show you that and where it's at right now. So let's see, I want this guy. And let's change to this dashboard. So this is, I was just playing around and at what some of the reporting is, but once you guys really start playing with it, we can look at specific projects and things like that. But I was going through and looking at, how many seconds until they press buttons, how many times they spent on the slide, the live feed of the information coming in, all of that sort of stuff. So the other thing that might be really interesting to look at if you're into xAPI or want to learn xAPI more is I use this all the time, which is data search. And these are the live statements coming in. So you can really see how I designed the context and let me know if it works in your context for what you want. Like, for instance, let's take a look at this click box. This is saying that we toggled it, but in context, I did a couple of things a little bit differently than what I've normally done. And one of the things that I did there is not only did I pass in the parent, which is the Captivate demo, so you can see this is the same parent activity we looked at earlier, kind of being shown here, but I also pass in a grouping, so it's a grouping of buttons. So now you can say, like, if you created a group of buttons, you could just watch, hey, when did they press these buttons? And it's just a much easier way for your LRS to serve up reporting to you when you can group different things together and do stuff like that. So that might be something that's interesting to look at, is just as you go through all the different statements that it's cranking out, the context and do those contexts work? Do they make sense to you? Would you want to change anything? The last thing I think I'll show you, just to give you a little bit better idea of what's going on with this whole thing, is the wrapper itself. So let's take a look. We'll look at the actual version of this conference call demo one that we're using. So I'm just going to go into assets.js, and remember we just pasted this in here, right? So I'm just going to open it in Visual Studio Code so we can take a look at it. First of all, if any of you all are codies, I apologize for the state of my code. I'm still cleaning it. I've done the best job I can to notate it and make it understandable to folks more than me, but I don't know how successful I've been there yet, right? You know, find to-dos kind of all over the code and all that stuff. But one of the things I thought that you might find interesting, I mean, first of all, you can look at the logic of how I'm doing everything that's in here, and, you know, feel free to change it or adjust it or do any of that stuff in your own usage as needed. But up front here, ultimately, like I said, this is going to be a desktop product, I'm hoping, where you can point and click and choose which features you want, which ones you don't, which verbs you use, which verbs you don't. And what that will ultimately do is just edit these parameters that are right here, right? So I talked about having a production environment or a sandbox environment. So right here, this parameter is set to production right now. If we put in those sandbox credentials, you would want to change this to sandbox, and then it would report to that that version of your LRS. So as soon as you save it, then anything moving forward would move from there. You can also toggle things like, is it reporting to the LRS? So if we change this to false, now it's still going to do everything. It's just not going to send it to the LRS. So I use this a lot. Like if I know I'm going to just have 200 nonsense statements because I'm trying to figure something out, I don't necessarily want that data clogging up my LRS, but I still want to see it. So now if I go back to that website again, okay, so this is the same website, but now I'm going to hit refresh. And now you can see reporting off. No LRS is set up for this session because we turned it off. So it's saying I'm not saving the statements anymore, but I'm still giving you the statements. So you can still look at them, audit them, make sure that statements are what you want it to be, but they don't necessarily have to send to the LRS. And then, it's just a matter of changing that one parameter back in our Visual Studio Code to turn it back on again. So if we wanted to report to the LRS, we would just hit true. And now it's going to report to the LRS again and save it. Here's all of the different verbs that it sends for just kind of normal usage. So it gives you access, entered. Return is if, I'll get into that later. View, complete, press button, and press click box are the ones that it uses kind of right out of the box. Again, you can turn all of those off. Maybe you only want to see slides they viewed. You don't really care about enter. You can set this to false, save it again, and now it won't send that enter verb anymore. Or let's say you don't like the way that I've set this up. Oops, sorry, I got all corrected there. Instead of passing entered slide, you wanted it to read in the LRS entered my slide. So now if we hit Command Save, let me go here to the Chrome again. Hit refresh. And now when I look at our entered statement that it sent out, well, actually it'd probably be faster and easier if we just went to the LRS to take a look at this. So if I go to the LRS now, hit a quick refresh, Oh, I hit the wrong refresh. But you see how it's changed the display now? Now it's entered my slide instead of entered slide because we changed that in the parameters. So I've tried to make this uber customizable so that you can kind of put in your company's vernacular and LRS language. I just kind of used the most conventional stuff that was out there. The next parameter is the actual verb activity that it's passing. So maybe you guys already use viewed, but you don't use this verb, and you've got your own verb and you want to make sure that you're using it. You can change that as well. So we could change this to anything we wanted to. In this case, entered is not a verb I could find in any registry anywhere. So I just created my own, and you see this custom verb prefix. What's that? Well, it's set right here. This is my custom verb prefix for SuperWrapper that it's putting in, and then it's putting entered slide on that. So that would be the ID that it's passing, but you could change this to anything that you wanted to. Or you could change this. If you don't like SuperWrapper, you want to make it your company or whatever it is for a custom verb, you just change this, and then any place this shows up, you're able to do that. Two more things, and then I'll stop talking. You can turn a lot of the logs on. So right now, statement is logging. But if you wanted, let's change some of these other things. Let's change quick activity logging. So let's change that to true. When I hit that, now when I come back here to Chrome and I hit refresh, before, remember, we were having, maybe I found a bug, or maybe it didn't refresh. Let me make sure. First of all, make sure it's saved. I saved it, and I haven't used this in a while, so I may have broke it along the way. Let me check. Yeah, I must have broke it off along the way, because what it's supposed to do is you can dig into the statements and see access, and the activity, but that's a lot of digging around. So it was just a quick human readable version of the statement. I'm making a note for myself to fix that log. I must have done something along the way. So let me see. Let's go back here again. Since that demo was a bust, let's look at something else. Change this back to false just for now. The other thing you can do is, especially if you're using this in Storm, so remember where it's getting the ID from. It's pulling the first part of your URL. So just to show here, it's pulling this part of your URL. But can you imagine, if you've ever seen a SCORM URL, it is ridiculously long, and all of a sudden your watershed statements just grew to, or your xAPI statements just grew to 10 times the size because the ID is so long. So if you want to use a completely different ID of your own choosing, you can do that by just coming in here and changing the base ID to have a value. So I'll change this base ID to HTTP. It's got to be a URI. And it does validate that. So if you pass in something wrong, it'll dump you back to the default parameter. So if it's not working, it's because your URI is not correct. So I'm just going to we'll just do test.test just to kind of see what we're doing here. And we'll even change the parent name to this is our test. And we'll save it. And now when we come here, we hit a refresh. And now if we go into our LRS and take a look at what's changed, okay, so now you can see the course name, instead of being SuperWrapper Captivate Demo, it's pulling it straight from the parameters, and it's now called This Is Our Test. And then when we come down here and we look at the ID that it's using, you can see here's the ID, that test.test, and then parent This Is Our Test. So it changed rather than creating it with the URL from up here, it's creating it to whatever you passed into those parameters. So you truly should have some really nice customizability. And then if you want to just go back to the default settings, you just change it back to null again. If there's nothing there, it will go back to the default. And that's about what I've got to show you guys. Hopefully that's enough to get you going and to have some fun with, and get lost and break it a few times and give me some feedback. Any questions you have, I'll certainly answer them as best I can.
Yeah, looking forward to testing this. Thanks for showing us so much.
Yeah, you bet. And I'm sorry if it was overwhelming. I just, like I said, I'll try to make this recording available so we can refer back to it and others can take a look. But really the first thing of getting it going, hopefully the rest kind of does it for you. That's really the intention here, but you do have a lot of control over what it does.
I really appreciate your time on this. This is exactly what I was kind of looking for, or to, try and create through our cohort.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, cool. It's been something that I've been working on for probably the better part of a year. I just found that we were doing a lot of little Captivate one-off things for work, and I was constantly recoding a new solution every time we came out with a new package, and it just wasn't sustainable. So I kind of said, all right, there's got to be a way to do this where I can take one package and make it work for all Captivates, and that's kind of where we're at today. So there's been a lot of time and thought put into it, but now I'm to the point where I could really use feedback from a perspective other than our organization and the way we use it every day. So I'm really looking forward to figuring out how you guys can break it and also how it's, what else it needs to be the tool that everyone needs. So thank you so much.
I'm assuming that with the verbs, if we needed to add another verb in addition to what you already have there, we could add it in the same format and it would take it.
So, yeah, but the question is, like, where do you want it to use that verb, right? So let me give you an example. So let's say you don't like access. So when someone opens the course, let's use that as an example. Instead of using the word access, you wanted to use the verb open. You could do that by just changing this to open here, and then change this to an opened ID, whatever that verb ID is. And then instead of spitting out access, it would spit out open, right? By default, it's access, but you can change that by changing these parameters. So if you added another verb, like how does it know to use it would be the question, right? So it knows to use any of these verbs and you can customize them. But that would be another example. If you're like, Brian, I wish I could track this and it's not tracking it, let me know, because maybe there's a way we can make Captivate listen for that action and then report that verb. Maybe there's something I've missed or not thought of.
Oh, sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. One other thing I'll mention is, and I think this is in the documentation on the README page, if not, in order to get buttons to track, go back to Captivate here. Okay, get my hot mess. In order to get buttons to track, like this button, let me see. No, I don't. Let me find the button that I've actually got something attached to here. I've got tracking. Okay, so this is a click box right here that I've got highlighted, and you can see that it's prefaced with xAPI_. That is what is going to make a button report. So buttons don't report on their own unless you preface them with this xAPI_. Then you can call the button any name that you want, but it has to have this xAPI_, otherwise it won't report. Because if you just, my thinking was if you just have a next button, like going to the next slide, it's just kind of another statement, because you're going to get the entered statement for that next slide, so you know that they pushed the next button because they got into the next slide, and that's your way to get there. But like in the case of my demo here, each one of these buttons makes a different thing pop up in our Captivate. So I wanted to know, how long does it take you before you're pressing this button and pressing this button and pressing this button? So each one of those buttons is prefaced with this xAPI so that it reports. And if there's a different logic or convention that you guys like, that's totally customizable. It's kind of just the best I could come up with when I was thinking of how to do this. All right. Again,
love it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I'm available on Slack anytime. You're certainly available for a phone call or a screen share or a walkthrough. So if you get into it and you're struggling with any of it, just reach out and let me know, and appreciate any feedback you all can give me.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem. I'll probably try to set up another call next week around this time. Actually, next week might be rough. I'm traveling, but at least if not next week, the following week, and maybe just touch back and base have some questions and maybe show you some other features and things, and talk about the state of it, because I'm sure 2 weeks from now I will have worked on it considerably more and added more stuff to it. Right now the quizzing is a little hit or miss, just so you all know. I'm not confident in anything that it's putting out for quizzing. That's kind of the next thing for me to really, tear out what I've got under the hood and try to make sure that all those statements are as they should be. So, awesome. Well, thank you all. And like I said, reach out on Slack and keep in touch.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.